All right, I want to call to order the fourth meeting of the Interim Joint Committee on Economic Development and Workforce Investment. At this time, Sasha, would you please call the roll?
Senator Gardler, Senator Carr, Senator McDaniel, Senator Mills, Senator Southworth, Senator Storm, Senator Thomas, Senator Wheeler, Senator Wilson, Senator Yates, Representative Baker, Representative Banta, Representative Beckler, Representative Bojanowski, Representative Bray, Representative Brown, Representative Callaway,
Present.
Representative Cantrell, Representative Elliott, Representative Freeland,
Present.
Representative Gentry, Representative Hart,
Here.
Representative Huff,
Present.
Representative Johnson,
Present.
Representative King,
Present.
Representative Kulkarni, Representative Lawrence,
Why, yes.
Representative Lockett, Representative Rowland, Representative Sharp,
Present.
Representative Sheldon,
Yes.
Representative Tackett Lafferty, Representative Truitt, Co-Chair Schroeder, Co-Chair Weber.
Present. I was not aware of a Senate boycott of the meeting today, but we will remember that in the upcoming session. All right, do we have a quorum? No. Okay. At this time, we do not have a quorum. We will act on the minutes when we do. We will have two sets of minutes, July and August meetings, to adopt. But we will move on with the agenda. At this time, I want to move to item number one, the role of hospitals in economic development. We're going to ask Nancy Galvani and Jim Musser at this point to come forward. Folks, if you will introduce yourself for the official record, please do so. And after you've done that, then you can go ahead and begin your presentation.
Good morning. I'm Jim Musser. I'm the Senior Vice President for Policy and Government Relations for the Kentucky Hospital Association.
Good morning. I'm Nancy Galvani. I'm the President of Kentucky Hospital Association. So good morning, Chairman Weber and members of the committee. I want to thank you very much for having KHA here today to discuss the important role our hospitals play in economic development. As you know, hospitals are, first and foremost, places where people go for compassionate care when their health has failed or when they're bringing new life into the world. So restoring health, saving lives, and helping bring new life into the world is absolutely the mission of our hospitals, and of course, patient care is always our North Star. But that said, hospitals are also very critical economic engines in the communities they serve. They are major businesses in every community where they're located. Hospitals are often one of the largest, if not the largest, employer in the counties where they're located. Hospitals pay above average wages, and those wages ripple through the communities the hospitals serve in the form of houses and cars that people purchase, groceries, clothing, entertainment, and all the other things that a family would buy. Kentucky hospitals add nearly $13.5 billion to the state's economy and employ nearly 75,000 people. Compare that to our signature industries, Kentucky bourbon, which adds $9 billion, and the equine industry, which adds $3 billion. Their combined employment is around 63,000 people. So that means that hospitals add more value and employ more people than bourbon and horses combined. But people rarely think of hospitals as such powerful economic engines of growth. A thriving hospital is key to economic development, and there's ample evidence to show that businesses do not locate in communities that don't have access to a hospital. Communities that either have no hospital or who have lost a hospital find economic development very challenging. No entrepreneur and no big company wants to locate in an area where they or their family or their employees cannot easily access health care. Dr. Bruce Yandel, Chairman Emeritus of the Clemson University College of Business and Behavioral Sciences, has identified a cluster of critical elements for economic growth. These include a good transportation system, a good education system, easy access to green space and amenities, and access to health care. All of these things are critical elements for a thriving economy, and if any one of them is missing, it makes economic development more difficult. The loss of a hospital is devastating to a community. When Our Lady of Bellefonte Hospital closed in the city of Russell in Greenup County, the impact was sharp and immediate. There was a loss of 1,000 jobs, and the city of Russell lost nearly 25% of its payroll tax base. We've seen areas that lose a hospital have a difficult time attracting new business. Local hospitals in the KHA are eager to work with local officials and community partners to improve the economy of the health of our people. A strong economy is very key to good health, and the social determinants of health, such as nutritious food, safe housing, adequate rest, educational opportunities, and a strong social support network, are all supported by a strong economy. The wealth of a community is a good indicator of the health of a community. Wealth and health are inextricably intertwined. Hospitals play a key role in the economy, and they work with employers, schools, libraries, and local leaders to develop the infrastructure to meet the social determinants of health in the community. Like any economic engine, hospitals require fuel. Unfortunately, the fuel supply for Kentucky hospitals has been squeezed badly, first by the pandemic, and second by the type of inflation that we haven't seen for 2 generations. Kentucky hospitals lost approximately $2 billion during the pandemic, and that's from a combination of a loss of the elective procedures from an extended shutdown of elective procedures, and then from a large number of COVID patients in our hospitals whose illnesses tended to keep them in the hospital longer. They required more resources to treat, but yet the payment did not fully cover the cost of care. Like all businesses, inflation is battering our hospitals. But unlike other businesses, hospitals don't have pricing power and cannot simply pass along the increased cost to the consumer. On any given day, approximately 80% of the patients in a Kentucky hospital are covered by Medicare or Medicaid, neither of which covers the full cost of treatment. Not the nominal charge, but the actual cost of providing the care. That's because the federal government sets the rules for these programs and how much hospitals will receive. Hospitals also operate under the Federal Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act, which we usually call EMTALA. EMTALA requires hospitals to treat anyone who comes into the emergency room without regard to their ability to pay. So can you imagine how long Best Buy or Walmart would be able to stay in business if the law required that them to provide their services and products to anyone who walked through their doors, whether they could pay or not? Despite the lack of pricing power, hospitals still have to cope with inflation. We have seen the cost of travel nurses increase by over 450%, from $88 million that we spent in 2019, that has gone up to $489 million, and that's just through June 30 of this year. And that cost is projected to be $1 billion by the end of this year. Hospitals are also major consumers of energy and food. Electricity costs have increased by 11.5% since last year. To run one MRI machine for 13 hours requires the same amount of energy that 850 people would use in that same amount of time. Expand that over scores of machines, elevators, lights, environmental controls, even the TV in the patient's room, and you can see how much money that means. U.S. energy production has been curtailed, and we have all felt the pain at the gas pump. But the increasing cost of petroleum isn't just felt at the gas pump, it's felt in our hospitals. The cost of exam gloves has risen 247% in this last year. Syringes and scores of other disposable items that hospitals use every day that are made from a petroleum base have become more expensive. Think for a moment about a hospital with 100 patients and beds being treated. They all get 3 meals a day, so that's 300 meals each day. The cost of eggs is up 40% since last year. Coffee's up 17% and poultry's up about 10%. So again, you can just see how the costs keep mounting up quickly. We understand that the General Assembly doesn't have power to control inflation or to undo the ravages of the pandemic. However, hospitals have to be able to do well financially in order to do good and to fulfill their mission of providing compassionate care for our patients, your constituents. Kentucky hospitals are calling on the General Assembly to be our partner to ensure the delivery of care our patients and your constituents need. The great news is that our proposal does not require any funds from the state. So let me repeat that. Our plan doesn't require state funds to help our hospitals serve our patients. Working in conjunction with the General Assembly and the Cabinet for Health and Family Services, the hospitals seek to expand the current Hospital Rate Improvement Program, which we refer to as ATRIP. As you may recall, the current ATRIP program applies to Medicaid inpatient admissions. The program allows us to draw additional federal dollars to increase Medicaid payment to a rate that's closer to the average commercial rate. The ATRIP program has been innovative, and while valuable to all of our hospitals, rural and urban hospitals tend to have significantly more inpatient admissions. What KHA proposes is to expand the program to outpatient treatment, and that will help all of our hospitals, but it's going to be especially beneficial to our rural hospitals. We expect that something on the order of 65% of the benefits of this expansion would inure to the rural hospitals. Obviously, these revenues would be a godsend to our struggling rural hospitals and certainly go a long way to help improving access and ensuring access in rural communities. Just like the current version of ATRIP, this expansion would require no state funds, but would allow the hospitals to tap into these federal resources. As with the current version, the hospitals would provide an administrative fee to the state to cover the costs with overseeing this program. And just like the current version of ATRIP, this expansion would be a win for all of Kentucky at no cost to the Commonwealth. As a reminder, the way the program works is that hospitals pay an assessment to fund the state share of the supplemental payments, and that is paid as an add-on to a Medicaid inpatient claim. Hospitals have to meet certain quality metrics to continue to receive the enhanced payments. We anticipate the expanded version of ATRIP would work the same way, but just would now include outpatient care as well. Again, the expanded ATRIP program comes at no cost to the state treasury and will be a highly significant benefit for our rural hospitals. Like you, KHA wants to make sure that all of our people, be they urban, rural, wealthy, or needy, have access to quality care when they need it. We strongly urge you to take up the necessary legislation to make this expansion possible. ATRIP expansion is going to allow our citizens in all parts of the state to have access to care and to keep hospitals working as economic engines in their community. Please keep your local hospital in mind anytime you're thinking about ways to build the local economy, because you're going to find the hospital leadership will be a key ally in its growth. Also, feel free to call on us anytime at KHA as well, because our goal is a healthcare system that serves the needs of all Kentuckians. And we're happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any members? Senator McDaniel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nancy, Jim, good to see you guys again. Appreciate it. And I'm going to be in an odd spot this morning. I don't know that and I appreciate where you're coming from. I've worked with you on these models before, but I'm going to be honest with you. Over the course of the last decade and since the last Beshear administration, the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, I don't know that I've seen much of a model that begs almost for government overtake of a system. When you look at your finance model, the government's financing a tremendous amount of this. When you look at your commercial pay, by the time you start factoring in the number of federal retirees, military retirees, et cetera, who are in private run but government health care, between the certificates of need, the rates that we've rearranged through the years, the federal resources, guys, the federal budget deficit can no longer continue to sustain what it's doing right now. I am greatly fearful that we are on a catastrophic course, and if we keep going back to this federal well, we are a small cog in a larger wheel that's leading us to catastrophic consequences with the debt that the nation's incurring and the deficits that we're running. I'm very sympathetic, especially to the rural plight of these folks, but I would be willing to bet that our urban hospitals would not be so keen as to turn over audited financial statements and make these same cases. And I love our guys, right? I love what Chandler does. I love what St. Elizabeth does up home and what Louisville's done with their takeover from Jewish and on and on. But guys, I think we're starting to run to a point where we've got to say we can only go back to this federal well so long. How many of us are complaining about inflation right now? How many of us are watching gas prices skyrocket and grocery prices skyrocket? And it's because the federal government continues to pump out more and more and more and more and more and more and more. And I could go on money. At some point, we've got to take a hard look in the mirror and say, how are we contributing to this? And like I say, it's an odd space for me to be in because I love what these folks do. The innovation that the private sector has brought to the healthcare system has unleashed cures and treatments that have been unknown in the history of man. But it's time to start asking some hard questions, and I hope that you guys will come to the table on that, and we won't simply sit here and look at ourselves in isolation, but realize we're part of a larger wheel, and this nation has a problem, and let's find ways to not contribute. I don't particularly have a question, Mr. Chairman, so much as if they would like to comment on that, I would certainly be willing to begin and entertain that dialogue. Thank you.
I would just say, Senator McDaniel, the issue for us is we have 1.4 to 6 million people on Medicaid, and we're getting paid 80% of cost, and that is not a sustainable model for our hospitals. This program is innovative, and this program, while it does draw on federal resources, it is a value-based payment system. So our hospitals have a portion of this money at risk, and quality is tied to it. So it's not just a matter of a money grab from the federal government. And this gets approved every year by CMS, so there's no guarantee that CMS is going to continue it. But CMS wants to see us move the needle on quality. And so by having part of this money tied to specific quality metrics, and we're talking about across all hospitals, acute care, long-term care hospitals, psych hospitals, rehab hospitals, and nothing, hospitals need resources to invest in quality. So that's what this program brings to our state, and that's why we're excited about it, because we are already seeing that quality improvement in the current program, and we're only partway through the year. So I think that's the sell for CMS, is that it's not just we're going to give you more money, but we as hospitals have to demonstrate that we are going to improve the quality of care, and that's what this money is tied to.
Thank you. Representative Bojanowski.
Yes, thank you. So about a month and a half ago, my mom had major surgery, and I spent a long time at Baptist Hospital. And I'm so grateful for the quality of care she received, and that she was able to recover from her illness. What I'm thinking about, and kind of following up on Senator McDaniel's question, if the answer isn't pulling more money in from other sources, how much of the problem comes from our current insurance system? How much of the cost for hospitals comes from people who are underinsured or not insured who don't get preventative care? And then their care, in turn, is so much more expensive because we haven't prevented something that could have been prevented. Is the question not to pull in more money, but do we need to restructure our insurance system altogether? And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, certainly we support more preventive care. We have a chronic our population has more chronic conditions, and certainly we need preventive care. We don't want people to wait to the last minute. We're seeing more delayed care actually since the pandemic. But at the end of the day, when 80% of the patients in a hospital are on these government programs that are paying less than cost, Kentucky, the Medicare program does not pay every state the same. And we are in one of the states that we get paid a lot less than other states get, and yet we are facing the same labor shortage, the same, rates for travel nurses. And so that, the hospitals, that is not a sustainable model. So, we have to be paid adequately for the services we provide. And really, this program is just trying to get us closer to the commercial rate for at least the Medicaid program. It doesn't fix the Medicare program, but our hospitals, are very struggling. And we're in a state that has a lot of, elderly, has a lot of people on the Medicaid program. And so we have much more financial strain than a lot of other states.
If I may ask a brief follow-up. So could you explain, I didn't know, I was not aware that every state is not paid the same. Do the states negotiate rates, or
No.
how is it that we are different?
The federal government dictates how Medicare sets rates. It hasn't been changed since probably the 1980s. And we get paid a lot less because actually we're more efficient and we're lower cost.
Okay. Thank you.
Remind me, approximately how many hospitals do we have in the state?
We represent 118 hospitals.
118. Of that 118, how many are in the position that you were describing, where they're in a hard financial position at this time? And can you give us any specific hospitals?
I would say 118. I mean, even our larger hospitals that you would think are very financially strong are struggling. The CARES money from the pandemic is long gone. The CARES money didn't cover the $2 billion in losses. Then we have inflation. We have $1 billion this year in travel nurses, and I'm having even large systems tell me, that these costs are not sustainable.
Okay, thank you. We may have you back at closer to the session. I'm assuming you're going to be having a bill coming forward that
Yes.
will address those. We'll probably have you back closer to the session to discuss in greater detail when that bill is released, if you're open to coming back and
Certainly. Thank
discussing
you.
it with us. Do we have any other questions from members? If not, thank you for your presentation.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Next up, we will have a discussion on Kentucky's aluminum industry. I want to ask Chad Harpole, Kenneth Callaway, and Michael Early to come forward. If you'll introduce yourselves for the record, and after you've done that, you can go ahead and begin your presentation to the committee.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the invitation today. I think we got Michael pulled up. What about the Wildcats? 4-0 going to Oxford? Okay. Again, thanks, Mr. Chairman, for the invitation. I am Chad Harpole. I'm Director of Government Affairs with Century Aluminum.
And I'm Kenneth Callaway. I'm Vice President of Human Resources for Century Aluminum.
And our colleague, Michael Early, will be joining us via Zoom here very shortly. Michael is the Director of Corporate Energy for Century Aluminum. We appreciate the invitation today to come talk to you and give you an update on Kentucky's primary aluminum industry. This is going to be more of a story than legislative testimony, but we think it's an important message for you as policymakers to understand, particularly moving into the 2023 session. I've been with Century Aluminum for 8 years now. Prior to that, I was with the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce. And even at the Chamber, knew little about the primary aluminum industry that's nestled in Western Kentucky. When I started with Century, there were 8 operating primary aluminum smelters in the United States. Up until 6 weeks ago, there were 5.5 primary smelters operating in the United States. And what is a primary smelter? Give you a little bit of overview. We actually take and make the raw product. I like to say we take the alumina, which is a white powder. We fuse a massive amount of electricity into it. And when I say massive, the hospitals were talking about how much their electric bills are. We use more power per day than the city of Lexington, 24/7, 365. And the hospitals set it up very nicely for us to talk about energy prices and the circumstances that we're under. So about 6 weeks ago, unfortunately, due to power prices, and we'll get into a little more detail, we had to curtail production at our Hallsville plant, about 30 miles east of Owensboro. We had to lay off 620 employees, and the average salary and benefits for those employees was over $100,000. So extremely high-paying jobs, no matter what part of the state you're in. The other side of the Hallsville smelter is that it was the last smelter in a NATO country that produced Department of Defense grade aluminum. There is no smelter in the United States or North America or any NATO-friendly country that produces that high purity, high grade aluminum. Our customer in Ravenswood, West Virginia, that took that aluminum and turned it in to the metal for Humvees or whatever use the DoD was using, is now having to source that metal from either the Middle East or Russia. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kenneth Calloway, who is going to talk a little bit about our operations, our employment situation, and then Michael Early will give you an overview on energy. I think it's very important. Early's testimony might be a little more focused for Chairman Gooch's committee, but as Economic Development Committee, it's extremely important, we think, for you guys to understand the message and what other industrial customers are facing right now.
Yeah, first I want to recognize with us, we have both of our union presidents, Andy Thompson and Andy Meserve, from both our Seabury and Hallsville facility, and they've been true partners with us during this process and through the years, and we're grateful for the partnership we have with them. And so we were here last year talking, as Chad said, about our 2 smelters, the one at Hallsville, the one at Seabury. Unfortunately, I'm here today just on behalf of the Seabury facility from that perspective as it is operational. And you may ask, what's the difference between the Hallsville and the Seabury facility? The Hallsville facility primarily produced SAL aluminum, which are these big blocks of aluminum that you have to remelt to turn into any type of product. So regardless of who buys these big blocks of aluminum, they have to throw it into a big furnace. They have to heat that up, turn it back into liquid again, and turn it into their product. Our Seabury facility, on the other hand, has the ability to produce what we call value-added products. So they can produce billet, which you may see these long aluminum pole-type pieces of aluminum that are going telephone pole-shaped pieces of aluminum going down the road. And those are called billet and also slab. And with that, they're able to run that through an extruder or through some type of a roll process to turn it into product, which takes less energy, which in turn customers provide more payment for. So the smelter there is able to produce that, whereas Hallsville was not able to produce that. And Hallsville just didn't have the ability, the infrastructure to be able to produce that. We have some customers here in Kentucky as well that we produce for. The largest one is Brazeway, located in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. They make automotive parts. They make HVAC and refrigeration parts. And then we have some indirect customers too that we sell to through one of our partners, and that would be Commonwealth, which is located in Lewisport. Metalco, which used to be Avaco in Shelbyville, as well as Logan Aluminum in Russellville. Mr. Early is going to speak here in a few minutes about the escalating costs to operate one of our smelters here in Kentucky, but our prices have more than tripled. for electric costs here in the state of Kentucky, and which is not a sustainable business plan, as you may know. Aluminum was produced and sold as a commodity, so we don't have the ability to set pricing for our product. It's similar to gold or silver or other metals in that the market sets the price for that, and we're unable to make it price adjustments for that. And so our opportunities for improvements are to produce more efficiently and to produce more value-added product, which we're working toward. Our Sebring facility produces about 70% value-added product now, and we're looking to be able to increase that in the coming months and years. We've had the similar workforce issues that most employers have had in the state of Kentucky. Unfortunately, with our Hallsville facility, as Chad said, we laid off more than 600 employees. We were able to work with local and state resources to help find them assistance during this process. Both GRAD and the Hancock County Career Center have been excellent partners and excellent resources for us, and we're grateful for the support they had to help coordinate benefits, to help coordinate unemployment insurance, as well as to set up job fairs to help be able to find our employees other employment. We've also been able to bring over approximately 50 employees from our Hallsville facility to our Sebring facility and hire them there in both salaried production and maintenance roles. And so we're happy to be able to retain some of that experience. The key to the Sebring facility's viability is to make sure that it runs stable. Apart from the power issue, it's our responsibility to be able to provide a stable operation for that facility. We've had similar issues with employment as other employers have, high turnover rates. This has been a record 2 years for turnover rates for the nation in general, and then for our facility there. To give you some perspective, we're running at about 22.6% turnover there at the facility. It's a hot environment. It's a very difficult environment for employees to work in. We have a very robust job market in the state of Kentucky, as all of you may be aware of. There are a lot of open jobs available for those who want to work. We have some of the best workers in the state, in my opinion, and so they're willing to work, and so they're looking for opportunities as well. The uncertainty due to Hallsville has also created concern in our employees' mind, which is driving up our workforce turnover issues, as well as I said, the record high turnover rate that we've seen here in the U.S. over the course of the last couple of years due to COVID. We're having to become creative in our processes to be able to help retain employees, and we're going through various different iterations of programs to be able to do that. One of the things that we've done is we've looked very hard at the Hispanic community within our areas, and we've gone through the process of translating our work instructions, hired translators, interpreters, and those types of things to be able to bring on. And we're in the very early stages of that. We have approximately 4 at this point in time, 2 of them bilingual, 2 of them only speak Spanish, and we are in the process of being able to ramp that up at our Sebring facility. Craft workers is another issue that we have at our facilities that has expanded across the U.S. as well. All employers are having difficulty finding craft workers. I will say that the Go Fame program here in the state of Kentucky, and Dr. Warren specifically at Henderson County Community College, has been an excellent partner, and we're going through the Go Fame program. We have employees going through the Go Fame program now. And we've had to do wage evaluations and increases in order to be able to offset that. But the need for an educated workforce, educated in the crafts, is vitally important. And any support that the state can provide there to help direct kids to those types of programs would be beneficial for us. And then another issue that you guys have discussed over the course of the last session is just childcare, accessibility to childcare. And I think COVID has brought that to the forefront of a lot of people's minds. And so we have at our Sebring facility, our hourly workforce, less than 1% of our workforce is female. And we get very few female applicants as well. And so a lot of that has to do with the accessibility to healthcare or to childcare, as well as the shift work that we have that makes it difficult. We also have a large number of young families. We've expanded there at the facility and hired a lot of young folks with a lot of children. And so any type of assistance and any type of discussion you guys have about that, we're happy to provide any input that we have. We don't have a lot of options. We're rural where we're at, and so subsidies and employer matches, those types of things would likely work best for us. An on-site location is also something we can consider as well. But we appreciate your consideration and your time in listening to us today.
We're going to turn it over to Michael Early for a discussion on energy now.
Good morning. I'm Michael Early. I'm the Corporate Energy Director for Century Aluminum. What that means is at the end of the day, I'm responsible for our electric power supply at our U.S. facilities. So I'd like to talk today about the power markets in the U.S. and particularly in Western Kentucky, where our two plants are located. And I'd like to talk about, what is driving the current increase in electricity cost. As you know, aluminum is an energy-intensive business. Even at normal times, electricity costs are our largest production cost. And so, like the rest of your industrial base in Kentucky, if you want to retain it and grow it, you need low-cost, reliable electricity, which frankly we don't have today, at least in terms of price. So first, let's talk a little bit about where our plants are located in Western Kentucky. We are in an area that is served by what's called MISO. MISO is a new entity that was formed by member utilities. It includes that portion of Kentucky. It goes primarily in the Midwest, but it goes up as high as Minnesota, and it goes down south, down toward Mississippi and Louisiana. What MISO does, it's regulated by FERC, and under MISO, the member utilities give up control of their generation in this sense, that MISO sets the price for energy every hour in this fashion, that it determines what the loads are in every hour of the coming day, and then all the generators owned by utilities or other entities bids in, and MISO clears that auction, and the price for the power that everyone pays is the cost of the producing energy at the marginal unit, the last unit that clears that auction. And in most hours, that unit is going to be a natural gas fired unit. So the increase in natural gas prices is what in large part is driving the increase in power prices we've seen. So let me give you some context for what we're looking at. Now, historically, the prices at our smelters for energy have been in sort of the mid $30 per megawatt hour range. Okay, in 2020, because of COVID, demand was down, and so our average annual price was in the range of the low 20s. But as in 2021, as demand came back up, prices came up in part because natural gas supply didn't come back as quickly as demand, and our average price was about 41. The real run-up started in about April of this year, sort of coincided with what's happening in Europe in the Ukraine war, and power prices peaked in August of this year at $95 a megawatt hour. I mean, that's 3 times what we normally would expect to be paying for power. And as we've indicated, certainly at Hallsville, we can't economically operate at that power price. And we're not alone. Other industries are facing those issues. We expect prices to be coming down. At least the forwards indicate that as we move into the springtime. But we're scared to death of winter. If you look at the forecast for winter prices, certainly in January, we're well above $100 per megawatt hour. That simply is not sustainable. And if you look at natural gas prices, if you look at Henry Hub prices, you can see that those prices are what's primarily driving up power prices. But let's talk a bit. What's causing natural gas prices to go up? Okay, well, first of all, when COVID came, natural gas production fell off, and producers were putting rigs out to drill new wells. And an interesting aspect of this is that as gas prices have come back rapidly. Producers are not ramping up production as quickly and as aggressively as you might expect. And part of that is financial markets. Financial markets are tired of gas producers spending all their money on increased production. They want them to build their balance sheets. Investors want gas producers to produce dividends. So gas production is not ramping up as quickly as demand has ramped up coming out of the COVID. Another big driver, of course, is liquefied natural gas. The United States is now the largest exporter of natural gas in the world, and it is ramped up very rapidly. And if you look at the numbers, the amount of LNG that's exported today, the LNG export facilities are totally maxed out with what they can deliver. A lot of it's going to EU, and we support that, but a lot is going to China as well. And if you look at what the Department of Energy has done in terms of licensing and approving further exports of natural gas, it doesn't look very good for the future, as LNG exports are starting to take up a substantial portion of total U.S. Natural gas production. The second thing, of course, is concerns about natural gas pipeline construction. Producers can produce more natural gas, but that they can't build pipelines to move it to markets, it's not going to do anyone any good. And as you probably follow the news, there's been a lot of pushback on natural gas pipelines. Many pipelines have been built, 90% completed, and the prospective owners have simply walked away because they can't get it completed because of environmental litigation. So what else is going on? Well, historically, when gas prices got high, they got high, decade and a half ago, what happened? Well, utilities switched to coal because coal remained then a relatively cheap source of power. And by switching to increasing coal production and reducing gas production, they could maintain the average cost of power at a reasonable level. Can't do that anymore. We're not seeing that. Why? Because one, there's been a very aggressive early retirement of coal plants. There simply isn't that much coal generation capacity left in order to do a lot of fuel switching. Secondly, we saw a substantial closure of coal mines, even before the COVID pandemic, and certainly during the coal pandemic. So even if you had the coal capacity, and some utilities do, and they want to find additional spot coal to buy, can they buy it? Well, maybe they can, maybe they can't. But if you're a coal mine operator that closed a plant, are you going to reopen a coal mine for a short-term sale? They want a long-term commitment. They need a long-term commitment to get financing to reopen those mines. And if they do get that financing to reopen the mines, what are they going to do with that incremental coal? They're going to sell it into the EU market, which is 3, 4, 5 times higher in terms of price than what they can the domestic coal market. So the ability to switch to coal from natural gas as gas prices increase in order to moderate the overall cost of power that was historically there is just not there today. Second question, well, what about renewables? Why aren't renewables holding these prices down? Well, you just can't build renewables very fast. One, if you look at most in MISO and in most utilities, there are literally hundreds of renewable projects trying to interconnect to the utilities transmission system. But the backlog is such that if I were to start today to build a renewable project, I'm 3 or 4 years out in terms of getting that resource online. And the other question is, well, can I, renewable costs are going up just like everything else. There's ongoing disputes about importing solar panels from China and other Asian states. So, renewables certainly in the near term are not going to address this issue. So, that's MISO. Now, in Kentucky, there is another RTO on the eastern side. That's PGM. They've got the same sort of issues. And there are other utilities in Kentucky that aren't part of an RTO. They're just a traditional freestanding utility. So, what's happening to them? Well, if a utility, has, as they've probably done prudently, hedged their fuel costs forward or brought their fuel costs forward, then the increases that they're seeing today are being moderated because they may have made prudent purchase decisions in the past. But at some point, those hedges and those purchases are going to run out, and you're going to start seeing the same significant price increases flow through to other customers, to mom and pop, to ordinary commercial customers. And it's going to be a shock, I think, to those ratepayers in terms of the size of their power costs going forward. So, what are we doing? One, we're hoping, frankly, for a warm winter that would help materially to get us through the winter without and lessen the demand on natural gas costs, which would tend to keep prices down. We're working with certain national industrial groups to try and address the LNG issue and the natural gas pipeline issue. And at the plant level, we're looking at, do we have options to simply, other than simply buying MISO energy at the marginal cost? Are there sellers out there to which we can enter into a bilateral power purchase agreement at a price that we can continue to operate at? We're obviously looking ourselves at solar projects, even though they would be out in the future several years. It's something we want to do. And lastly, we're looking at what can we do operationally? Can we make our operations more flexible so that we can manage our power costs in that way? But my point here is, this is a very trying time, not just for Century, but for all of the industrial base in Kentucky and elsewhere, and customers like us, but also legislators, whether state or federal, need to be looking at a way to bring our natural gas and electric power system back down to a level, a normal sort of price level. Otherwise, there's going to continue to be demand destruction and loss of jobs, and we certainly don't want that, and I don't think anyone else wants that. So, anyway, appreciate your time and happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, gentlemen. We actually do have quite a few questions here. I want to begin with Senator McDaniel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be as brief as we can to respect the agenda. Just a quick statement and then a couple of questions, gentlemen. First of all, if the last 3 years have taught us anything, it is the fool's errand of our reliance on authoritarian regimes for things that are critical to this nation, be it the semiconductor crisis that we currently experience with our reliance on the Chinese, which I fear will bleed into battery technology and with the amount of the market that they have there, whether it is gas, corn, and wheat with Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, what that's done to the European market and consequently is spreading like contagion around the world. I believe that this nation has probably learned some hard lessons at large and small levels. I don't mean to remark to you guys as small at all, as you guys are the point of the spear on good jobs in rural Kentucky. But at the end of the day, hopefully we have all learned some lessons. And if we have, I think that we will begin to continue to see some reshoring pretty dramatically of everything from high-tech industries into more basic ones and emerging technologies. All of that being said, I have 3 questions. First of all, I remember dealing with this issue when I very first got here. Joe Bowen, my hero, was spearheading it, and I don't remember exactly what the resolution was. So, A, could you help me with that and kind of then elaborate a little bit more on what, if any, subsidies you guys get governmentally? I think they're pretty minimal, if any. And then finally, Michael, for you, what would the impact of a fully functioning nuclear facility mean to you guys? Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'll take the first two and then have Michael address the nuclear question. 10 years ago in 2012, we had Senator Bowen had a bill that would allow Century to take the two smelters onto the open market. So right now, Kentucky law requires that all residential, commercial, and industrial customers be served by the utility in the area, and the bill that later got worked out outside of the legislature in an agreement with Big Rivers, Century, and the Public Service Commission allowed us, because of our unique situation that we were in, to buy power on the open market in MISO. So we are the only customer in Kentucky that has that ability to do that through the negotiated contract. I have received the questions, if we were still on Big Rivers, would we be in the situation that we're in today? And my answer is simply, we wouldn't even be having that conversation, because the plants would have closed in 2013 had we not been able to buy open market power. And it basically allowed the two plants to stay open and the one plant to stay open today with that agreement. And we have, at the time, again, I was not with Century. I was actually on the other side of Century at the time. But we have a great working relationship with Big Rivers to this day, and it's been beneficial for the economics of Western Kentucky. To the question on government subsidies, we receive none. As Kenneth said, we are a commodity traded business. The only thing we can do, to make money is to control the input cost, but we receive no government subsidies whatsoever. When we were talking about idling Hallsville 2 months ago, we were having conversations with the Department of Defense and the White House and trying to explain, the importance of that, and hopes that, some type of contract or something could be arranged that we could keep the flow of DoD metal going, but it just didn't come to fruition. So we received no subsidy whatsoever. And with that, I'll turn it over now to Michael to answer your nuclear question.
Sure. Well, nuclear power has both an economic aspect and a political aspect to it, as you know. Look at France. France went forward with nuclear power decades ago, and it's been very successful for them. And so they're sitting pretty right now in Europe, as Germany, for example, is struggling because they have abandoned their nuclear and coal facilities and aren't getting the gas from Russia anymore. In the States, it's been, as you know, a difficult road for nuclear power. Most nuclear power plants that were in existence 30 years ago have been retired. Interestingly, California, their last nuclear power plant was scheduled to be retired, but given circumstances, they've now extended its operating life for some short period of time. I think in recognition of the fact that the move toward renewables has not succeeded. So, in terms of going forward, we actually have a plan in South Carolina, and the utility there was a 45% owner of a proposed new nuclear power plant. It's not been a success. It's been a disaster, frankly. In total, they spent, the utility and its partners spent about $9 billion on that plant. It's never going to operate. They've recouped some portion of that money, but it's been a significant loss. The other nuclear power plant under construction today is by Southern Company. It's sort of the same untested design. They're going to go forward, but it's going to cost north of $20 billion to complete that plant. So the question here is, do I support nuclear power? Absolutely. I think we have to have it. It has to be done right, though. I mean, you need to have a proven technology. You need to reduce the amount of regulation that delays the construction. I mean, a lot of the cost is associated with the fact that under the delays, you can't get the thing built for 10 years. If you could build it quickly with a proven technology, and if you've got the political will within the state to build it, I think it's a good idea. And secondly, people don't call it renewable, but it's carbon free, and carbon free is important to us and to increasingly a number of industries, because the people we sell to are interested in the carbon content of our product.
Representative Callaway.
Yes, thank y'all for the presentation today. I appreciate y'all coming. I spoke with Chairman Weber a couple months ago when you guys closed. I thought it was ironic for 600 people in the state of Kentucky to basically lose their job and not really hear a whole lot about it. I mean, this is devastating to a community. Part of my former district, for those of you that don't know, the Century Aluminum Hallsville plant was in my former district. And I'm getting calls still currently of people that still can't get unemployment claims processed, and just the trickle-down effects of everything that happened. And so I appreciate Chairman Weber for allowing us to put some spotlight on this so we can understand why this happened and what we do to prevent it, if there is any preventable measures. Thankfully, we're at a point in time to where there were jobs out there when this happened, so some people were able to move on to other things. These were good paying jobs. We're talking about 90,000 plus in excess paying jobs for people. It is hard work, and there is a turnover rate there, but I just felt it important that we make sure that the public and everybody understands what happened and what's going on in this area. I had a question. One is when you guys put a statement out discussing about the Ukraine war, how would you weight the percentage of the Ukraine war impact versus national energy policies, and or could national energy policies change that would offset the impact of the Ukraine war? Because it seemed like to be a lot of the focus of the public statement that you guys put out whenever you were talking about the closing of the facility there, the idling of the facility. So maybe you could shine some light on that.
Michael, you want to address the percentage?
Well, yeah. If you look at the historical chart of MISO energy prices, at least in the area we're served by, the real uptick occurred in April, March and April of this year. And so I think the fact, that Russia, there was the Ukraine war, the threat and the actuality of Russia cutting off the supply of natural gas to Europe, and the political pressure here in the States to commit to provide natural gas to our allies in Europe certainly had an impact on a material impact on natural gas prices starting in that time period. What we can do about it, frankly, and this is why we're interested in the whole LNG issue, is that if you look at where the exports go to, obviously a significant amount now goes to Europe, but a very large percentage is going to China. And I think there's a legitimate question to ask is, why are we exporting a valuable U.S.-based commodity, natural gas? Why are we exporting it to China when that export is increasing domestic natural gas prices that is forcing companies to close or not expand? I mean, the result of that, we're exporting jobs because we're allowing the export of our natural resource, natural gas. So, and that's under the control of the Department of Energy, the federal government. So we're working with others to, let's try to get a better handle under what we're doing here in terms of managing the export of our natural gas. The other point is there's one large natural gas export facility that I don't know the name right now, but it was forced to close. It had an issue, and when it closed, you saw an immediate downtick in natural gas prices. And so, LNG exports driven by what's going on in Ukraine, both the amount and the price, is having a big impact. So, if the Ukraine war should end tomorrow and supply of gas to Europe should be restored, prices would come down. So, and if you look at the numbers, it's a material contributor.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you guys. Wish we were here under a little bit better circumstances than the conversation we're having today. I wanted to go back to a comment you made in your opening presentation, Chad, with respect to the grade of aluminum that you provide for national defense purposes. Could you just again say what the available sources are now because of the idling of the Hallsville plant?
Yes. Hallsville was in a unique situation because of the environmental controls, the way that smelter was set up, that allowed us to make the high purity metal. I mean, 99.99 exponentially 9 percent aluminum, which was used, for DoD grade. It was, and I said this earlier, it was the last primary aluminum smelter in a NATO member country that produced that grade of aluminum. The only other sources for that grade aluminum currently are the Middle East, because they make aluminum because of the abundance of natural gas on site, and then Russia, and then potentially China, depending on what you believe coming out of China, if it's purity or not. So that's the two options, the two, Russia and the Middle East option, that our customer is looking at in Ravenswood, West Virginia. And people ask, well, why don't you just start making it at Seabury? Well, it would be probably close to $1 billion investment in the scrubber system that would be required to put into Seabury to retrofit that facility, which is completely cost prohibitive.
Follow-up comment, Mr. Chairman. So what we have here is a scenario that many of us have warned about over and over and over again in these committee meetings. And the scenario is, due to a rush to force feed technologies into our energy production matrix in our country, we have now a situation where what we once produced in Kentucky for our national defense effort is no longer possible because of economic factors driven by energy policies that have driven the prices up to where you can't even stay in business. And I think that's totally unacceptable. And we have got to rein in these desires to go to energy technologies that simply are not economically feasible at this time. We've got to get you back open. We've got to be able to provide for our national defense. And I will ask you a question, if I would, with that comment. If and when we get some help to you guys as far as energy policies, how quickly or even can you open back up and start providing that high-grade aluminum again? Would you be able to do that?
Yeah, I'll start, and Kenneth, maybe you can chime in. If light switch is a bad analogy, but if we could flip the light switch and everything was back to more normal times, and look, we don't expect energy prices to ever be back in the mid-30s. I mean, we're not naive on that. I mean, if we had a more stable energy market long term, and we saw the futures were looking at a point that we could afford to reopen that plant. That plant was brought down in a proper manner. It wasn't just shut down and walked away and all the metal froze in the pots. It would still take a significant investment on Century's part. But I would say probably a 4 to 6 month period to bring that plant back online. But Kenneth will probably address, the other thing is we laid off 620. A lot of those folks have gone and found other jobs, so we would have a labor shortage that we would have to, start a rehire, retraining process to get folks back to work there. So.
Yeah, and we did work with the union on that process to extend those recall rights to attempt to get those folks back. So we have a longer period of time to do that. The question is, will they come back, given the instability? But it would be our hope that they would. And even now, our employees that are still on site, we have roughly 33 employees still on site working. They're doing prep work, which serves two purposes: to generate some cash through the pulling out of the of the metal that's currently frozen in the pots, but also that preps the facility for a restart as well. And it would be our hope that we're able to do that.
You know, and the one reminder that I remind folks all the time at all levels is we just dumped $160 million into that plant over the last 4 years. And, you know, the last thing we wanted to do was idle the plant after putting that type of investment and bringing that pot line back up. So, you know, again, it was brought down in a proper manner that hopefully one day if things stabilize, we can get it back up.
Thank you for your comments. And I would just say, hang in there, get ready. I'm hoping that help is on the way in the very near future, and we can get you guys operating and again, providing for our national defense the way that you have for years. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. We have 3 more individuals with questions on this topic, and we're going to go next with Representative Bray.
Thank you all. And I guess this question is probably for Michael. With the passage of the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, there was a lot of taxes, new taxes, fees, stuff like that put on natural gas, for instance, $6.5 billion in fines and taxes, you know, in the future. It doubled the excise tax on coal production. How does that kind of factor in on your all's long-term forecasting for energy prices and for the sustainability?
You know, the Inflation Reduction Act was a mixed bag. Obviously, didn't do much for inflation, but in terms of energy, you know, the focus, at least in the media, has been on what it's done for potentially for renewables, and you know, we followed up on that to see, well, what does that mean in real life? And you know, we had bids for renewable projects that were still good, you know, timely, and asked them to reprice it based upon, you know, the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act on renewable tax credits. And it's about a 15% reduction if you believe the numbers. So it will help there. But on the other side of the coin, in terms of increased taxes and restrictions on fossil fuels, you know, it cuts back the other way. So, you know, at the end of the day, in terms of natural gas, the only thing that's going to solve this problem, frankly, is, you know, the war in Ukraine needs to go away, and Russia needs to begin providing some gas to Europe to bring the European demand back down into line. DOE needs to take a more reasonable approach to LNG facility permitting and export approvals. But the bottom line is domestic U.S. gas production needs to ramp up, and domestic U.S. natural gas pipelines need to be built, and that's the bigger question. That's what needs to happen in order to bring demand and supply for domestic U.S. gas back into something that looks like balance. And that'll bring prices down to more normal levels. You know, the taxes and other things, you know, they're not helpful, but they're not going to push it one way or the other, it seems to me.
Representative King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for your testimony today. It's been very enlightening. My brief comment is more for my colleagues here in the General Assembly. Many of us, but unfortunately not all, have been forecasting this for many a time. Too many folks have been demonizing coal and our fossil fuels, and we've been saying for many years this is exactly what was going to happen. So it is a fairy tale to think that we can fuel a first world country on solar and wind, and I'm hoping that my more recent colleagues here in the General Assembly are learning from today's testimony. If anyone thinks you can fuel a first world country on solar and wind, I highly recommend you come back and review this portion of today's testimony. Thank you.
Senator Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for my tardiness, but I have been listening and way down from Eastern Kentucky. I've really enjoyed this presentation. I think it's brought up a lot of excellent points about some of the national security concerns that many of us have about the deindustrialization of the United States of America. And, I don't necessarily look at this as a partisan thing in the sense that I think that Republican Party has as much guilt as the Democrat Party in voting for a lot of trade deals and other things that put our native industries at a disadvantage. To some degree started the process, which has been accelerated by the Democrat Party's attack on our energy system in the United States. I guess to what extent have you seen, to follow up on that statement, to what extent have you seen energy prices increase with the government's attack on coal? Is there a one-to-one ratio with the decrease in coal production and coal reliance and the increase in the cost of electricity?
I'll let Michael take that. He watches it every day.
I don't think you can, quantify it in that detail and, do it sort of, one for one. I think without question, though, as I said before, that historically, the response to high natural gas prices by utility would be to fuel switch over to coal, and coal production and coal prices would moderate any increase in the overall price of electricity. So the fact that we've seen destruction, early retirement of our coal generation fleet, and closures of coal mines, that's a driver. If we had the traditional coal generation base and coal mine production base we had 20 years ago, we wouldn't be seeing these prices. Utilities would be burning more coal and not buying expensive gas, and that would bring down the cost of gas. So you're right. Yes.
And just a brief follow-up, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
One brief follow-up.
Yeah, I know when I first got up here in 2019, I actually have, I think, one of the very last coal plants that was constructed in the United States of America is right across the border in the Commonwealth of Virginia from Pike County. And, my understanding is it's one of the cleanest producing plants in the United States of America. And yet, when I contacted the PSC about the possibility of this type of generation in Kentucky, I was basically told that the EPA and the folks in Washington would never allow us to build that type of plant here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Is that essentially your experience and your understanding as well?
Well, I think it's twofold. There are restrictions on the permitting side, but the other part of it, if you talk to utilities or even the coal industry, is the lack of available financing for building a new coal-fired plant. I mean, basically, a utility can't find a bank or a lending institution to lend them the money to build a new facility. I've talked to the folks in the mining industry right now, back to the points that have been raised. Why don't we just start mining more coal? Problem is, as Michael pointed out, we shut down a lot of coal mines in 2020. A lot of the equipment, the continuous miners and the equipment they need to mine more coal, and unfortunately with the market, probably export more coal to Eastern Europe, is tied up in delays and materials that they can't get. But in addition to that, the lending institutions aren't lending money to buy new equipment to a coal mine right now. So it's kind of two-pronged for the utilities and the coal companies. Not only is the permitting part of the problem, but the financial side of it is extremely problematic as well.
So I assume you're describing ESG and some of the woke politics on Wall Street.
Well, I'm not pointing out anybody. It's just talk to the utilities or the coal companies in the state. I had a conversation with the utility last night. It's just the reality that they're facing.
Right. Thank you.
I have a comment. I mean, every utility is required to prepare what they call an integrated resource plan. It says over the next 20 years, how do I plan to serve my expected load? What generation am I going to retire? What new generation are going to be built? I'd be shocked if there's any utility in the United States that includes in their integrated resource plan a decision to build a new coal plant. And it's a political decision. And every political message that's being sent to utilities is transition away from coal to gas and renewables. And until that, and they're getting support for that from their public service commissions by and large. And until that changes, you're not going to get off the path you're on.
Senator Thomas is going to jump straight to his brief question.
Thank you, Chairman Weber. Chairman Weber, again, I apologize for being late, like Senator Wheeler, but I just have a lot of demands on my time in Lexington and elsewhere, so I do apologize. But Mr. Early, my question is for you. We've heard this morning, and I really had hoped to just come here and just be quiet and not say anything, just kind of just settle in. But we've heard a lot not so subtle attacks on a partisan basis, and so that commands that I ask you this question, okay? And I'm going to try to stay as non-political as I possibly can. Senator Manchin has a bill now that would encourage energy permitting and really an approach that we need all energy resources, which I think is the wisest approach possible. That America needs to move toward energy independence. We've been talking about going back to the Jimmy Carter age. So I'm going to look forward. I'm not going to engage in backward criticism. And I want to ask you this, and Chad, I would appreciate if you weigh in on this as well. What's your assessment of Senator Manchin's bill, which has strong bipartisan support in terms of how we move forward in this country from an energy basis?
Yeah, you might know this. We used to have a plant in West Virginia that is now closed for the same reasons, high power costs some decade ago, and so we have some relationship with Senator Manchin and the group I talked about before, the National Industrial Energy Group has met with Senator Manchin and his staff to talk about his bill. I think our sense of the bill is clearly for Senator Manchin, it's getting that one pipeline built that goes from West Virginia to Virginia. That's important to him and to his state. But the bill doesn't go nearly far enough to solve our problems. I think there needs to be a single one-stop place for permitting of natural gas pipelines. When you split it up amongst half a dozen different agencies and siting processes, it's never going to get done. And secondly, you need to revise the applicable standards. I mean, there are very well-funded environmental groups out there who they just don't want pipelines built. It's a point of religion almost. And the standard for approval by the agencies is so loose that basically any smart lawyer can find a basis for appeal of an agency order approving the construction of a pipeline and delay it and continue that process. And that's what we've seen, that pipelines have gotten permits, they've been challenged, litigated, a lot of money spent in construction, but at the end of the day, the owners just throw up their hands and say, this is never going to happen. It's never going to get built. So we need much deeper, much broader permitting reform than the Manchin bill provides in order for us to build a natural gas pipeline infrastructure that will support not only our current industry base, but the industry base we'd like to develop.
And Senator Thomas, I'll comment not necessarily on the. I'm sorry.
That's it. Thank you.
On the Manchin, the bill, but we've had a couple of measures pass Congress and signed recently, the Inflation Reduction Act, and other measures, the infrastructure bill. And we're monitoring those very closely for, research and development dollars, because, one thing I think we've tried to be consistent today is we're for an all-above approach, including renewables. I mean, we've looked into that. As Michael said earlier, our customers, our end customers are demanding, metal be produced by green energy. But we just want to make sure, and we're working with the folks in D.C. and working, with the governor's office to make sure that, the monies that are set aside with that within DOE, that's kind of all out for proposal right now. We want to make sure that, it actually goes and hits the ground and really impacts our industrial base, not just Century Aluminum, but all industrial customers and residential customers for that research and development, looking into the future, as you mentioned.
Gentlemen, thank you for your testimony today. I hate to cut you off.
No problem.
We will have, if you're open, I would like to have you back in the coming months, maybe after we start the session. There's obviously a lot of interest in this topic, and I think some more exploration would be warranted.
Appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate you coming.
Thank you all.
At this
Thank you
time,
very
I would
much.
like to entertain a motion for the adoption of the July minutes. Can I have that? Motion second. All those in favor say aye. Adopted. I would like a motion for the adoption of the August minutes. Motion second. All those in favor say aye. Minutes are adopted. Thank you. We're now going to move on to our final item on the agenda, the employee misclassification. We have Richard Vincent and Kyle Johnson coming forward. Gentlemen, we are going to start to lose additional members due to an announcement over in the Capitol. I'm going to ask you to jump right into your presentation, and we'll see where we go from there.
Absolutely, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee, for the opportunity. There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Appreciate the opportunity, invitation to appear before you. My name is Richard Vincent. I'm the Executive Vice President of Associated General Contractors of Kentucky, AGC of Kentucky. With me, I have Kyle Johnson with Frost Brown Todd. The purpose of our appearance here today is to highlight concerns with 803 KAR 1006, the employee relationship regulation that was recently found deficient during the May Administrative Regulation Review Subcommittee meeting. This regulation replaced 803 KAR 1005. This General Assembly has been extremely supportive and has provided considerable opportunities for the commercial construction industry. In turn, our members are delivering projects that promote, provide, and sustain economic development across Kentucky. I realize today and throughout the hearing process, you have heard about workforce development and how that is key to furthering every industry in Kentucky. I can tell you from our perspective, what we are seeing right now is a huge threat to our industry and our abilities to perform. According to a recent workforce survey, 92% of our members are currently hiring. 91% of those members are significantly struggling to fill those open positions. I say that to illustrate what is keeping our members up at night, number one, and also to emphasize our concern when confronted with abrupt regulatory changes that introduce more uncertainty into the workforce equation. With this, I'll turn it over to Kyle and ask him to provide a little bit more specificity.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, members of the committee, Mr. Chairman. To give context to why this
Can
issue
you pull the microphone closer to you, please?
Yes. To give context to why this issue is so important to the Associated General Contractors of Kentucky, I wanted to just begin briefly with a little bit of historical context of the wage statutes and the regulations implementing them. The General Assembly passed Chapter 391, also known as the Kentucky Wages and Hours Act, on April 2nd, 1974. And at that time, the General Assembly defined the term employee as any person employed by or suffered or permitted to work for an employer. By December 1974, the then Kentucky Department of Labor, now the Education and Labor Cabinet, adopted 803 KAR 1:005 for two primary purposes. First, to discuss what constitutes an employee-employer relation. Second, to guide the department in carrying out its responsibilities under the law. Section 4 of the administrative regulation identified the test that the Department of Labor would use to evaluate the employee relation. The test outlined many examples of the types of relationships that would and would not constitute an employment relationship, and listed factors the agency would use to assess that issue in prioritizing certain factors over others. For the intervening 48 years since that Wages and Hours Act was passed in 1974, The test used by the administrative agency remained unchanged, and the Act of the General Assembly continues to define employee the same way, as any person employed by or suffered or permitted to work for an employer. Even though there has been no material change to this definition for the past 48 years, the Labor Cabinet has nevertheless adopted an administrative regulation that upends this 48-year status quo. We believe it is for the General Assembly, not the Labor Cabinet, to change the definition of employee. And if the General Assembly had any issue with the test outlined in the 803 KAR 1:005, one would presume that the General Assembly would have taken action to overturn that regulation in the past 48 years. The General Assembly has a strong interest in preserving the separation of powers, meaning the principle that says it is for the General Assembly and not an administrative agency to adopt or amend laws. Beyond these inherent principles and interests that belong to the General Assembly, the businesses that are subject to these administrative regulations have a strong interest in ensuring that the law is applied clearly, uniformly, and consistent with the intent of the General Assembly. Compliance with the law would become an administrative nightmare if the status quo could be continuously changed by unelected officials. That is even more true when a regulation has been on the books for 48 years without material change. The regulated community has clearly grown accustomed and developed an understanding of how the agency enforces the law. When an entire industry, such as the construction industry, has come to rely upon these longstanding regulations and act to form relationships with contractors and subcontractors, any change to the manner in which the agency enforces the act would be devastating. Stability in the law matters to them. The Associated General Contractors of Kentucky has a strong interest in ensuring that these regulations do not become final. The organization's members are made up of contractors of all sizes that regularly work with and rely upon the independent relationships it has with a variety of subcontractors. General contractors need to be able to contract with specialists without risk that those relationships will be classified by the Labor Cabinet as an employment relationship. It would upend the industry if the Labor Cabinet could simply declare that an employment relationship is created when a contractor subcontracts with an electrician to perform electrical work on a residential construction project, or when a contractor subcontracts with a plumber to install plumbing on a commercial construction project. The clarity of that is provided by the existing, long-standing regulation, and that ensures that these projects that fuel Kentucky's economy continue without undue influence by the Labor Cabinet. This change to the regulation by the Labor Cabinet would be felt even more significantly by the construction contractors and subcontractors that have limited resources, are unaware of the attempts to change the administrative regulation, or how the change would impact them moving forward. Make no mistake, the administrative regulation adopted by the Labor Cabinet upends the status quo. For the past 48 years, the Labor Cabinet in Section 4 of the regulation identified the well-known, well-established right to control test as the test that, and I quote from the regulation, the principal test for determining whether an employment relation exists. This test evaluates whether the possible employer controls or has the right to control the work to be done by the possible employee to the extent of prescribing how the work shall be performed. Under the new regulation, however, the Labor Cabinet would abolish this principal test. In its place, the Labor Cabinet would adopt a factor that asks about the nature and degree of control by the principal, whatever that means, but relegate that factor as the final factor out of a list of 6 other factors. To add insult to injury, the new regulation adopts new factors and places those factors above this one. One factor that the Labor Cabinet has added to this regulation is one that asks about the degree of independent business organization and operation of the independent contractor. As we understand this factor, it is designed to push contractors to subcontract with companies that are organized as separate business entities rather than as a sole proprietor that has decided not to formally incorporate his or her business. This regulation would undermine the relationships that the contractors have with these entities, and would also, of course, would likely have a detrimental impact on the subcontractors themselves and the sole proprietors themselves. Businesses with limited resources would be struck particularly hard by this regulation. Under the regulation, as it currently exists, businesses could turn there and find many examples of the types of relationships that are and are not considered independent. This type of clarity is very valuable for businesses that might not have the resources to hire an attorney to help them with this assessment. In addition, examples like those in the regulation provide guidance to the agency to ensure that the agency enforces the law in a uniform manner and does not leave the issue to the whim of an unelected official. These examples are no longer exist in the new regulation, potentially creating this result. These regulatory changes not only upend the 48-year status quo, they usurp the power of the General Assembly to enact laws. The changes impact most those businesses that have come to rely upon the longstanding regulation that has existed for the past 48 years, such as developers, construction businesses, contractors, and subcontractors. The purpose of the regulatory change is best shown in the agency's repeal of the following language in 803 KAR 1:005. The Supreme Court has held that the words "to suffer or permit to work" to define employee do not make all persons employees. Rather than standing by the statement of the U.S. Supreme Court, through this regulation, the Labor Cabinet seeks to limit the types of relationships that will be considered independent and expand the discretion the agency has to make this determination. It has attempted to do so without any action by this General Assembly over the past 48 years to prompt this change. Because these attempted regulatory changes to the law are contrary to the separation of powers, the Associated General Contractors of Kentucky requests that the General Assembly take all action necessary to ensure that they do not become final. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. I do have a couple questions for you. Who is responsible for enforcing employee classification issues?
So that, in terms of who's responsible for doing it, it depends on the specific circumstances. So the Labor Cabinet certainly has the power under the statute to enforce the law, so they could come in and do an investigation, and as part of their investigation, make the determination of who is and who is not an employee or independent contractor. Of course, their employees also have the ability to go to the courts and ask the courts to apply the law as well.
And then I have one additional question, and I think you kind of touched on this, but I would like to hear your response again specifically to the question. A measure that's as far-reaching as what we've seen implemented through this administrative reg, in your opinion, really should have gone through the legislative process and should have been in bill form passed by this General Assembly and gone through the normal course of action that any bill would normally go through, correct?
Exactly. This statute adopted in 1974 by the General Assembly, and the regulations promptly adopted thereafter implementing that regulation have been in place for 48 years. This new regulation implements a change to the status quo, and changes can only be made by the General Assembly.
Thank you. Representative King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for your presentation. Chair Weber touched on my question. Mine is, I guess, more of a question of timing, so it might be a question for you and our good chair and staff possibly. So I've heard 1974 referenced several times, and I understand that. When was this regulation submitted, put into place? Has it been submitted to our Administrative Reg Oversight Committee? Like, where are we in this process, Chair? I'm a little bit confused. Thank you.
Go ahead. You can go ahead and attempt to respond.
Yes, the 006 was submitted beginning of the year. I don't remember the specific date, and has been considered by the Administrative Reg Review Committee, which found it deficient at their May, I believe it's the May 10th meeting. So it was found deficient at that point. Mm-hmm. Certainly.
Representative Callaway.
Just a quick comment. Thank you for your presentation, and just encourage our members with what has been brought to us today. We've got to be looking the opposite direction that this regulation is going. We have small, and when I say small businesses, small contractors, some which serve right here in the General Assembly. And I mean, you hire a person for a day to clean a job site that you never see again, and you looking at payroll and processing, and there's so much already that is regulated with this. We've got to be going the opposite direction to make it easy for people to do business in Kentucky. Thank you for bringing this to light, and I hope that we get behind this and really do what needs to be done. Thank you.
All right, we have no additional questions. At this point, I do want to make a comment. I'll address some of the concerns that Representative King had. I asked Mr. Vincent and Mr. Johnson to come to this committee and present on on this administrative regulation. As they have both indicated at the May meeting, that regulation was found deficient. Those individuals that were in opposition to this regulation indicated at that time that they had hoped to work with the Labor Cabinet, or Education and Labor Cabinet now, to resolve some of those differences. The Labor Cabinet was not interested in doing that, despite the fact that a bipartisan number of members of that Administrative Regulation Review Subcommittee asked the Labor Cabinet to come back and work with those that had concerns about the bill and try to the reg and try to resolve those before they were implemented. This issue has come before the General Assembly in the past. Chairman Pratt is here. The Small Business and Information Technology Committee that he chairs actually voted down this bill in a previous legislative session. The General Assembly has chosen over the course of at least a couple of other sessions not to take this measure up. Some folks have suggested that because the General Assembly failed to act, that it was necessary to go this route of the administrative regulation process. And I would maintain and state here today that the fact that the General Assembly did not take up the measure indicates the will of the General Assembly. We did not see the legislation as something that needed to be taken up and again voted on in committee. I think what we are witnessing here is an example of where the executive branch has chosen to overstep their boundaries. The legislature has spoken in the past. It's spoken very clearly by our decision not to take up this bill and to previously vote it down. The gentlemen here have expressed their concern and hope that the General Assembly coming back in 2023 will address this measure, and it is my hope that this General Assembly in 2023 legislative session will end this administrative reg, and it will be very short-lived. That said, gentlemen, I appreciate you coming here today. I was hoping to give you an opportunity to present your views and your opinion on this bill, since you were denied the opportunity to work with the Education and Labor Cabinet to accomplish that. I thank you. I appreciate the patience and the endurance of the members of this committee, and at this time I now ask for a motion to adjourn. We have a motion and a second. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.